A very good morning to you. It's a new Monday and, of course, a new week as well. Today is June 12th. Historic June 12th it is, and we just came off the national broadcast there from the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, encouraging Nigerians to keep the flag flying and, of course, recognize what MK Abiola stood for when it was June 12th. Anyways, my name is Janice Cobham, and I'm super delighted to be here again today. It's Rise and Shine. Let's rise and shine together.
Good morning, Africa. Good morning, Nigeria. Good morning, Akwa Ibom State. Of course, today most people are locked, in front of their screens as there is a public holiday to commemorate this year's celebration of Democracy Day. It's a good thing that we get to rise and shine together and have very, pertinent conversations around topical issues touching us as Nigerians. Of course, biggest on our table now will be the speech of the president as just concluded a few minutes ago. But yes, it's Democracy Day. We are all remembering the sacrifice of one of Nigeria's patriots to make sure that we have what we now experience in our country as democracy. Of course, some people would say, no, we haven't actually practiced democracy yet as a country. But then we can also say that we have been journeying there gradually.
Yeah, definitely. And like we have seen, 30 years already to mark democracy anniversary, or rather 30 years of celebrating and marking the annulment of what was considered as the freshest and freest and most credible presidential election in Nigeria. And that's talking about June 12, 1993 presidential election. And of course, we know that before now, we celebrated Democracy Day every 29th of May when we are handing over as to the next administration, or rather to a new administration. But I know that a lot of people came on the heels of the fact that, look, June 12 and the annulment of June 12, even though it was illegal, was the freest and the fairest presidential election we've ever had in the annals of history in Nigeria. And so to commemorate that day and also immortalize MK Abiola and what he stood for, let us begin to celebrate June 12 or rather, let's begin to celebrate Democracy Day on June 12. And that's why we have, that celebration shifted from May 29 to June 12. And it's been 30 years since that annulment took place on June 1993, actually.
It serves as a proper reminder, that things can go this way or that way in regards to democracy. And in just like the speech that the president gave this morning, he said that, this reminder serves as a reminder into the beauty of democracy, to tell you that, a winner can lose tomorrow and, a loser can win tomorrow. So there is it's not cast in stone. This person might have been announced as the winner of the election. Tomorrow the indices might be different. Like I think the conversation we've had in the last week is the fact that it was former President Muhammadu Buhari that said Nigerians have written something in the sands of time that you can be in the office for the next 4 years and you return with an attempt for the next 4 years, and Nigerians will say, no, we don't want you in that position. So it just means we are gradually moving, as I said earlier, and it's worth remembering. But then again, not just to remember the sacrifices of MK Abiola, how can we build on the sacrifices of some of these people? The precedents that they left for us, have we done better by on the history that he served us with? How many more presidents have we had that lived up to that kind of standard that he set? And how many more people who have aspirations for political positions are willing to sacrifice the greater good of nationhood over personal ambition? I think that's something also,
of course, yes,
we need to look into.
You've said rightly. I think the man MK Abiola stood for nationhood, and that was why he was unanimously elected into office by Nigerians. But that election was annulled by the then Babangida and all of that. But again, we see today that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is actually heating on this particular June 12th. Of course, he has brought the significance. We remember also that, you know, a lot of administrations actually said we're going to be celebrating Democracy Day on June 12th and all of that. But we saw little of it, you know, being very transparent during the administration of administration of former President what's his name now, Muhammadu Buhari,
Yeah.
and all of that. So but I know that for Tinubu it's going to be different because he played a very pivotal role in that particular election of MK Abiola. So we are going to see him, and it's been evident even in his speech. He began his speech with you know, remembering and putting forward all the things that MK Abiola stood for. And I know that, again, people have also, you know, likened this 2023 presidential elections to what happened in 1993 and all of that. But I know that a lot of, you know, critics of Tinubu at this moment will be asking questions like, why would he be, you know, pushing forward what MK Abiola stood for when the whole elections that brought him into governance is marred with a whole of controversies and discrepancies and all of that. But he's also talked about fuel subsidy. He's also made mention of the fact that, look, Nigerians should sacrifice a little bit more in terms of what we are going through, and what now, the palliatives to cushion the effect of subsidy is not being put on ground. Nigerians should sacrifice a little bit more, and for the collective good of all. And he has also talked about the fact that there's going to be a massive investment in transportation, massive investment in electricity, massive investment in education and road networking, road infrastructures now, and all of that. Then he also talked about that his administration is going to be faithful to truth, justice, equity for the rule of law as well.
Of course, these are things that, you know, we expect to see as it goes on. And we also remember in his speech this morning, he made references to certain things that he had said in his inaugural speech to just emphasize that he intends to stand by them and uphold them, especially with regards to upholding the tenets of democracy. Of course, he also cited the fact that the just concluded February 25th election is a reminder that democracy is alive in Nigeria. Now, that might stand on different legs for different people at this time, but then I think this February 25th election brings us very closely to what the, you know, June 12 experience in 1993 was like, because it's more like, you know, this particular election cycle is one of the most tightly contested elections after the 1993 elections. But then with the discrepancies seen here and there, a lot more Nigerians are asking, have we really upheld democracy? You know, having to see that it is President Bola Tinubu who is making this speech today, as aside any other of the candidates who might have been an MKO Abiola today, you know. So this discussion is up for grabs. But at the end of the day, like we'd always say, collective good, nationhood is something we must place above all of our ambitions and the rest of it. But of course, still giving voice and breaking down the Democracy Day speech by the president this morning, just coming more like, you know, when former President Muhammadu Buhari will come out and do it more like, let's just greet the country and my fellow compatriots. And this is something we've seen the president.
I think Bola Ahmed Tinubu also used that phrase this morning, my fellow compatriots, when he was talking about the fact that, look, we should come together and sacrifice a little bit more until, you know, everything has been put in place for the collective good. The emphasis was for the collective good of all of us in the country. But I think that we should also look at what Mr. Peter Obi of the Labour Party is also saying about today that is being celebrated as Democracy Day as well. He's saying that he has claimed that the nation's democracy is deeply troubled while its destiny remains uncertain and precarious. Now, according to him, it is regrettable that the country is now in an era where foundational pillars of democracy are undermined, by prevalent impunity and pervasive violence and bloodletting. Of course, he was also on his Twitter, verified Twitter handle, where Obi lamented that the country lacks selfless leaders committed to national interest, sustainable development, and innovative thinking that offers every Nigerian freedom of choice of abode, protection of lives and property, and ordered liberties. That's Peter Obi's opinion about today. But again, when we try to analyze this particular comment by Mr. Peter Obi, you find out that I'm going to take this one that he's talking about the country being in an era where foundational pillars of democracy are undermined by prevalent impunity and pervasive violence. I think there's another one he talked about, not having selfless leaders who are committed to national interest and sustainable development and innovative thinking that affects every Nigerian. Yeah, serious concerns here and serious issues have been raised here by the man Peter Obi. Yes, the truth is Nigerians will always complain that Nigeria is a good country, but when we look at the kinds of leaders that we have today, they are leaders that are not, are not out there. They are leaders that are not selfless enough to give Nigerians the kinds of dividends of democracy or the kinds of leadership that we will actually want. Nigeria is a good country, but we have bad leaders, and that is absolute truth as it stands right now.
I think one of the things that, His Excellency Peter, of course, former governor of Anambra State and Labour Party presidential candidate, pointed out with regards to today's celebration is the fact that there is a trust deficit between the leaders and the Nigerian citizenry. And he says in the democratic landscape of the country, this has continued to expand rather than narrow down. Now he's saying that if we even reflect on the collective choice of late MKO Abiola as a worthy leader for the nation, where we've seen, the Nigerian government and people across the world celebrate, we'll now say that we have not necessarily lived up to the expectation or the worth of that particular sacrifice. Why do we have that Nigerians and its leaders do not have common ground, like we'd always say, a place where we meet with regards to policies and how democracy should help the people? When we even talk about democracy, government for the people, by the people, and for the people, which part of this do we actually uphold in our country? Of the people, for the people, by the people. Hardly any of those phrases do we actually really uphold in our country.
Sure.
So it still shows us that we have a very long distance to cover. Something happened, I think it was last week, 2 or 3 African countries were recognized for the part they play in democracy in Africa. Nigeria was not mentioned. Even as the what's that, the Lion of Africa, there's this other one
Giant of Africa.
Even as the Giant of Africa, her democracy was not rated A in Africa, something to look up to. There were some other 2 African countries. So it still means that we have a lot of gap to cover, in spite of how much fanfare that we have around democracy.
Of course, when we talk about the fact that we were not mentioned as those that are holding to the ethos of democracy, would not also say that we've not done well as a country. Would say that a lot of Nigerians are also of the opinion that we are still taking our baby steps. But then again, how can we be taking baby steps at 23? Because when we look at when we started practicing democracy till date, we know that it's over 20 years. I think today we're celebrating 23 years of unbroken democracy. So what Nigerians seem to be celebrating, they're celebrating the smooth transition from one democratically governed or democratically government to another democratic government. That is what we are celebrating. But when we begin to analyze what have we achieved in our over 23 years of democracy, of practicing democracy, I know that some Nigerians will tell you that we have not achieved anything, or we have achieved seemingly very little. But still talking about Democracy Day speeches and what other people are thinking about today, a former vice president and People's Democratic Party PDP presidential candidate in the last election Mr. Tiko Abubakar is saying that democracy in Nigeria remains in bondage and it will need the energy of all or everyone to rescue it. Now, the former vice president, who stated this in his Democracy Day message to Nigeria, said that the desire to make Nigeria's democracy self-sustaining and independent of anti-democratic elements is the new frontier of participation by all Democrats. Now, I like the angle that the PDP presidential candidate is coming from, and of course, former vice president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, he's not saying that, of course, he's also looking at the fact that, look, for us to achieve total democracy in the country, it has to be a collective thing. You know, all Democrats are supposed to put their hands on the plow and see that, you know, we actually move the country forward and all of that.
Speaking about botting out undemocratic elements in the system, that's something the president referred to in his speech this morning. So we are also looking at the fact that, okay, of course, this is a tweet by Atiku Abubakar, presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party. He says, on this occasion of Democracy Day, it is time for us to reflect as a people and a country on our journey to becoming a democratic society. For Nigerians who were around during the dark days of military dictatorships, it is important that we appreciate the successes that we have achieved in making democracy the norm of politics in Nigeria. Now, he says, but democracy without a corresponding commitment to the principles of fairness and fidelity to the rule of play by stakeholders in conducting elections still leaves the people prostrate to dictatorship tendencies. Of course, pointing out there that although we are in democracy, are we absolutely free of dictatorship, so to speak? More responses coming in from Twitter now. Of course, Nigerians were, even if you saw the live feed, a lot of people had several reactions. So this is Dari saying, excellent Democracy Day speech delivered by my president Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Of course, there are lovers of the president, and there will always also be naysayers in this country.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's not also, it wasn't also something that we did not expect, you know, from the likes of Mr. Peter Obi and Atiku Abubakar. Let's not also forget that this particular election, the presidential election of February 25, is still at the tribunal. You know, people seeking to reclaim their stolen mandate and all of that. So definitely we'll be having conversation along the lines of, okay, so even if we're celebrating democracy, is it the will of the people that is actually ongoing at this point in time? So it seems like it's a dictatorship, but we are also saying that we do not even want to go back to the military rule where they rule us by edicts and edicts now, you know, and all of that. So let's see how definitely we'll be going through this period at this time.
Definitely. Of course, at this point, my president is okay, that we're looking at trends on Twitter this morning, and of course the president's speech has climbed up to the ladder. Of course, there's going to be a lot of back and forth. I was looking at the feed this morning. Some people were expressing disappointment, other people were saying, like one of the tweets we read this morning, great speech by the president. Of course, we are looking forward. I think the president has actually absolutely come forth with a lot of I don't know how to call it, soothing speeches in the few weeks he's been on that seat. His speeches just look for a way to marinate the people, and it looks like even the expectations of people that did not necessarily want him in power might just be settling in. Let's see as we move forward, and I think that puts the country in a good place. Well, at this point, we'll just look. We have more tweets. Of course, we want to look at more tweets coming in, and this is from Siminalai Fubara,
the governor of Rivers State.
Yes,
he says, I join our president and my fellow leaders in expressing my solidarity and hearty good wishes to all Nigerians on this auspicious occasion of celebrating the nation's Democracy Day and our progress as a developing nation since the Fourth Republic. Yes, that's from Fubara there, the newly elected governor of Rivers State. But at this point, I know that a lot of Nigerians will be having different opinions about today. Of course, celebrating democracy, 23 years of unbroken democracy and all of that. And we are yet to see all the criticisms from the president's speech this morning.
Yeah.
But so far, so good. A lot of people are also commending him for the speech. I know that he has also appealed to the conscience of Nigerians, to sheath their sword and sacrifice a little bit more in terms of the fuel subsidy removal and also for the good of the totality of the country. But he's also said that his government is going to stand for justice, equity and fairness as well. So we are looking forward to see that happen in the coming days. But at this point, we take a breather and we join Mary Joseph. We're standing by for the news briefing. When we come back, of course, the big one, we are going to be looking at what the papers have for us and also going to be looking at how journalists and journalism has fared so far in the 23 years of unbroken democracy in the country. We'll be linking up with David Hundain, who is going to be joining us from London this morning. Just stay with us.
Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTime's DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Heads of state and government, Secretary General, delegates.
This was the Lagos Nigerian for Spectrum TV to improve 45 seats in counting.
A very good morning to you and welcome to your morning news briefing Spectrum, live from Uyo. I am Mary Joseph. First in the news this morning is a report that President Bola Tinubu has hailed the winner of the June 12, 1993 presidential election, Chief MKO Abiola. He describes the late businessman who died in suspicious circumstances after his election was annulled by the late General Sani Abacha as a martyr who stood for principles that are far from valuable than life itself. In a separate development, the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, has sued President Bola Tinubu over the failure to probe the allegations that $2.1 billion and 3.1 trillion naira public funds of oil revenues and budgeted as fuel subsidy payments are missing and unaccounted for between 2016 and 2019. SERAP filed a suit against Tinubu and the Federal High Court in Lagos, seeking an order of mandamus to promptly investigate the allegations. In the meantime, Planet 101.1 FM crew yesterday held its 10th anniversary Thanksgiving at the Destiny International Mission Uyo, where the chairman and CEO of TAF Media Group, owners of the broadcast media trinity of Planet FM, Spectrum TV and Thanksio FM, charged well-to-do Akwa on keying into the federal government's deregulation on electricity to also help in solving the myriads of power issues building more areas of the state, just like TAF Media Group is doing in the broadcast. In his remarks during the Thanksgiving service, Afia explained the concept of deregulation while reiterating that there are many areas of the society that need urgent attention, which would be worth commemorating in 10 years from now, like Planet FM is doing in the media industry. We head straight to the foreign scene where Kyiv has announced that Ukrainian forces have retaken a village in the war-torn country's southeast, the first reported gain of the offensive. Ukraine's ground forces said in a statement that soldiers of the 68th Separate Ranger Brigade had liberated the settlement of Bergotan in the eastern region of Donetsk. In sports, Eyimba drew 1-1 with Rivers United at the Mobolaji Johnson Arena, Onikon, Lagos, to claim a 9th Nigeria Premier League title. The draw with the 2022 champions means that the People's Elephant topped the NPFL Super 6 playoff table with 9 points from 5 games. And that's all we have for you this morning. We'll give you more stories in our news at 12. I'm Mary Joseph. Let's head back to Rising Channel where we have Janice and Oyai on standby. Do have a wonderful morning.
This was the
Heads of state and government, Secretary General, delegates.
This was the Lagos Nigerian for Spectrum TV to improve 45 seats.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTime's DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Nigerian police, which is the only one allowed by Muslims, our governance have to share police powers with the president as stipulated by the constitution. We do not have a federal government police force. We have the Nigeria Police Force, which shall be administered, organized, and supervised by the Nigerian Police Force.
No, my lord, I want to say something. I want to say something here. Perhaps it might also enlarge the scope of people who should be invited here for examination. My lord, if we cannot find those who literally murdered Abiola, who are those people who could be said to be the beneficiaries of the death of Abiola?
Rogers has linked you with some of the killings he did.
He never did.
He linked you with the attempted murder of Hebrew.
He did not.
My lord, the matters counsel is leading the evidence in our matters.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my lord, but we can't be talking about cases which are in court.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my lord. These cases are in court, my lord. I'm just reminding you, your lordship.
My lord, sorry, my lord, I think I'll be in cross-examination.
Legally Speaking, a program that deals with legal issues and questions we face as citizens of this amazing country, Nigeria. Legally Speaking. Join us every
Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
for Legally Speaking.
Every society is premised on the quality of relationships forged by its inhabitants. The health of these relationships determines how well people, relationships, organizations thrive and how long they stick together. Join Uyai Anyekan on Connect every Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. and on Sunday 2:30 to 3 p.m. on channel 421 on Star Times to catch all the conversations, interviews, real stories and how to navigate relationships and family life in the 21st century. Real people, real faces, real stories. Connect live on Spectrum Television.
One truth not often told is about the transformation that Africa has undergone in recent decades. Africa is shaping its own destiny and should be referred to as the African opportunity. On Spotlight Africa, we paint the African picture the African way, laced with truth, detail, and the color of the African continent. Join Uyai Anyekan every Tuesday and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Spotlight Africa, telling the African story.
Good morning and welcome. If you're just joining us, this is Rise and Shine, and we're coming to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. Mary Joseph has just brought us tidbits of global news, and just before that, we were extraing the Democracy Day speech as delivered by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, by 7 a.m. this morning. Of course, in his speech, he eulogized the contribution of the late MKO Abiola to Nigeria Day democracy. Of course, he is the reason why we set a day aside to celebrate what democracy should represent in a country like ours. Of course, we've continued to take responses and reactions about this, and one way you can be a part of all of that is if you come on live right now at Spectrum T Online on Twitter, and let's get your thoughts about the President's Democracy Day speech this morning. Do you think he did well? Do you think we are currently living in the democracy we want, or is this what we want versus what we are experiencing? Of course, we do hope that you're also following us across all social media platforms, all of which you can find at spectrumtv.ng. If you need to get on the go this morning, we are live on YouTube and on Facebook. Of course, all of those links and platforms can be found on our website. At this point, we'll be moving straight forward to Daily Spotlight, where we bring you information from the front pages of our national dailies.
Okay, so on Daily Spotlight this morning, we take some of the major headlines making it on the front pages of our national dailies, and we'll be starting with the Nation newspaper. The big story there says, June 12, why we must defend our democracy, by Tinubu. And we have the writer saying, expect better deal from me. Judicial reform has started. Abiola's sacrifice should not be in vain. Moving forward, we also have stories here on Emefiele's exit and the fireworks before suspension. Yeah, that was a big one on Friday. Was it Friday now? Yes, on Friday. And it was one story I was expecting for us to talk about, but of course, events have overturned that. But anyways, we'll still get back to it. Emefiele's exit and the fireworks before suspension. We also have that My Nigeria Air story by ex-minister Sirika. Now, when Emefiele was suspended as governor of Central Bank of Nigeria, on Twitter it was fire because a lot of people, in fact, Sirika trended because Nigerians were of the opinion that one man down, which was Emefiele, and then I think two more else to go, one of which is the ex-minister of aviation now, Hadi Sirika. Let's move forward. Shetima's last-minute push swings support for Akpabio and Abbas. Tomorrow we'll be seeing the constitution of the 10th National Assembly, and the power tussle and leadership tussle has been something that has really put a lot of Nigerians on the edge of their seats. But those are all the stories that we have on the front page of the Nation.
Moving on from the front page of the Nation, let's look at Daily Independent. And then the big story on Daily Independent this morning says, let's sacrifice. I feel your pains on subsidy removal, says Tinubu. Gives reasons why he suddenly ended fuel subsidy regime. Asks citizens to guard, protect democracy like precious jewel. Page 29 is where you can find that. Why Senate President should be a Christian, by Shetima. Vows to woo more senators to Akpabio's camp. 52 senators-elect attend Akpabio's pre-election meeting. Oh, wow. Atiku Obi laments state of Nigeria's democracy. We also see here Okpadokun Osage blame military poverty over democratic backsliding. Serap sues Tinubu over missing $2.1 billion, 3.1 trillion naira subsidy payment. Okay. No cause for alarm over health of Akeredolu, says APC. Of course, we saw over the end of last week, we saw information that the governor of Oyo State now, Ondo State rather, was rushed to the hospital. We also see here 10th House of Reps, Betera Gadi withdraw from race, back Abbas. We also see here June 12, annulment, a tragic mistake, says Jerry Ghana. That's another perspective. Okay, how red tape court held up controversial Nigeria Air project. Ministry engaged post holders on 3 months contract only. Stakeholders describe exercise as national disgrace. Want probe. DSS role rather precludes arrest, detention of Emefiele unless. Okay, page 4. That's all that we have on the front page of Daily Independent.
Okay, so we are going to also look at what the Punch newspaper has for us this morning. The big story here says Democracy Day, Tinubu hails MKO Abiola, promises to ease subsidy removal pains. We also have that DSS sees Emefiele's passport, plans home office search. Moving forward, a bigger part of this particular Punch newspaper is covered up by a court judgment now. But President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in his inaugural speech, we also have that presidency backs Christian Senate president. What's this now? Betera, and another person steps down. I can't actually see that name on the front page of the Punch, but that's all that we have this morning on the Punch newspaper.
Moving from the Punch, let's look at the Vanguard newspaper. The Vanguard this morning says use June 12 as lesson to drive Nigeria's development. Edwin Clark, IBB, Atiku, Obi, Ghana, others. Page 5 is where you can find that story. Of course, Tinubu addresses the nation today. Activists protest high cost of living, meet at Abiola's Ikeja home. Nigeria should be crisis-free, says Edwin Clark. Democracy in bondage in Nigeria. Incumbents must stop influencing polls, says Atiku. Gains of June 12 can deepen our democracy, IBB. Annulment, a tragic mistake, says Jerry Ghana. Don't take democracy for granted, Tinubu warns. We also see here, of course, there's like June 12 annulment, rather shocking revelations. What Nigerians must know about the plot. 103 decrees promulgated in 1993 alone to regulate elections. Security chief stuns NEC chairman. Oh, is there going to be an election? Our efforts to give Nigeria the best election, Professor Humphrey Nwosu, Professor Yakubu's promise that crashed. Of course, there's history laden in that particular story. You can find that on page 13 to catch up on what exactly happened and the new revelations that are being dug out. We also see here failed transactions, banks, others trade blames as customers, agony persists, fuel subsidy, school honors, groan, seek government's assistance. Financial economic uncertainties, insecurity drive up life insurance. Life policy rises by 18.2%. Trend to continue as economic downturn persists, says operators. We also see here NMDPRA accuses ExxonMobil of oil theft. Page 12. 10th Senate. Plot to stop Yari thickens as more senators back his ambition. Page 10 is where you can find that story. We can also see here that Djokovic seals record 23rd Grand Slam title in sports. And that's all we have on the front page of the Vanguard.
Okay, let's see if we have other papers to talk about this morning. Of course, Daily Sun is here, where we see that the big story on Daily Sun says we must bear pains of fuel subsidy removal, says Tinubu. You can find that on page 6 and 28. The writer here says pledges to govern with fairness, respect for rule of law, democracy in bondage. Nigeria ex-VP gains have not been exploited by leaders, says former military president. Fireworks over Emefiele's suspension, his successors' failures by stakeholders. Experts predict positive market outing amid suspension. Okay, let's see how that goes. National Assembly leadership, it says beware of bad advices. Southwest Group wants Tinubu. We also have that not clear enough to read. Let's just move forward now. Kanu's ill health. IPOB rejects governor's sponsored surgery, insists on his release for better treatment. IPOB rejects government-sponsored surgery, insists on his release for better treatment. Page 27 is where you get details of that from. And of course, the bigger part of the Daily Sun newspaper now has been covered by pictorial stories. It says winning team to renew the hope of Nigerians. Of course, pictures of different faces, that of the president and his vice, that of Senator Ojuzo Kalu as well as Senator-elect Abubakar Yari. And those are all the stories that we have on the front page this morning of the Daily Sun. But at this moment, I will just take a very short breather now, and we try to link up with our guests. Don't forget, our focus for this morning is democracy, the role of journalists in entrenching democracy. And we are going to be talking to David Hundain, an investigative journalist this morning, trying to link up with him. But we'll take a short breather and we'll be right very, very shortly. Just stay with us.
Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTimes DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Every society is premised on the quality of relationships forged by its inhabitants. The health of these relationships determines how well people, relationships, organizations thrive and how long they stick together. Join Uyai Anyekan on Connect every Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. and on Sunday 2:30 to 3 p.m. on Channel 421 on StarTimes to catch all the conversations, interviews, real stories and how to navigate relationships and family life in the 21st century. Real people, real faces, real stories. Connect live on Spectrum Television.
Nigerian police, which is the only one allowed by grossly abused. Our governors have to share police powers with the president as stipulated by the Constitution. We do not have a federal government police force. We have the Nigerian police force, which shall be administered, organized, and supervised by the Nigerian police force.
No, my lord, I want to say something. I want to say something here. Perhaps it might also enlarge the scope of people who should be invited here for examination. My lord, if we cannot find those who literally murdered Abiola, who are those people who could be said to be the beneficiaries of the death of Abiola?
Rogers has linked you with some of the killings he did.
He never did.
he linked you with the attempted murder of Hebrew.
He did not.
My Lord, the matters counsel is leading the evidence in our matters.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my Lord, but we can't be talking about cases which are in court, my Lord.
Is this an adversary proceeding?
It's not, my Lord. These cases are in court, my Lord. I'm just reminding your Lordship.
My Lord, sorry, my Lord, I think I'll be in cross-examination.
Legally Speaking, a program that deals with legal issues and questions we face as citizens of this amazing country, Nigeria. Legally Speaking. Join us every
Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
for Legally Speaking.
One truth not often told is about the transformation that Africa has undergone in recent decades. Africa is shaping its own destiny and should be referred to as the African opportunity. On Spotlight Africa, we paint the African picture the African way, laced with truth, detail, and the color of the African continent. Join Uyai Anyekan every Tuesday and Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Spotlight Africa, telling the African story.
Welcome back. If you are just joining us, this is Rise and Shine, and we're beaming live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. Of course, several conversations have already gone on this program this morning. Of course, this is our breakfast show, and we would say thank you for being a part of it already. Are you following us on Twitter, Spectrum T Online? We need to get into a really strong conversation. This morning, we have an astute investigative journalist who's joining us to have a big conversation. Now, if you follow David Hundayin on Twitter, you know you really want to get on our Twitter handle now to send in your questions and have a real-time conversation with him on issues and matters arising in Nigeria. Of course, our guest this morning is David Hundayin, who is an investigative journalist. Of course, he has a peculiar reporting style, and at times is open source, and of course won multiple awards, but of course is largely slashed by a lot of criticism for the undercover work he does. It's with great delight this morning that we make welcome David Hundayin all the way from London, United Kingdom this morning. Good to have you on our show, Rise and Shine, David. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the first time on Rise and Shine and Spectrum Television as well. You're one person that a lot of Nigerians are always looking forward to hearing from. You've done a lot of undercover jobs recently. Of course, we saw what you did with the whole drug issue associated with President Bola Tinubu. And recently as well, you did something on the Nigerian air that was marked as a sham in the country and all of that. We welcome you to Spectrum Television this morning, and of course Rise and Shine once again.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get into the conversation. Today is June 12th, and like we've seen this morning, 30 years since the annulment of the 1993 elections. And of course, remember also that before now, Democracy Day was celebrated on May 29. But during the administration of former President Muhammadu Buhari, he decided Nigerians actually were the ones that pushed. Let us see how we begin to celebrate the real Democracy Day on June 12th. And that has happened. This morning, we had the speech of the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So I would like us to start the conversation this morning by looking at his speech. He said a lot of things, eulogizing on MK or Abiola. But what's your take on that particular speech this morning?
I should start by saying that it's no surprise that he would want to cast himself in a certain light, to make a certain association, because I think part of what established his political brand at all in the first place was this idea that as a member of NADECO, which he was in the 90s, that he was instrumental in the fight against military dictatorship, and the return of democracy in 1999 was at least in part due to his efforts alongside those of NADECO. That's certainly the narrative that he would want to put across. So, and it follows logically from that he would also want to be associated with the legacy of MK Abiola for a number of reasons, not all of which are benign political reasons. Some of them I find to be quite questionable reasons. So, to my mind, based on my individual reading of what his political motivations are, the specific attempt to associate himself with MK Abiola is done for a variety of reasons, but the reason which I perhaps find a bit questionable is that it's, in my opinion, is an attempt to cast himself as some sort of assumed descendant or assumed political descendant of MK Abiola as the supposed, de facto leader of the Yoruba ethnic group or the Southwestern political interest group, which I find to be very mischievous, because this assumed consensus, which has been a big thing he has been trying to push since 1999, that he's the consensus leader of the Southwestern political caucus, and there was no meeting where this was decided. There was no consensus where it was decided that this person represents the political progeny of Obafemi Awolowo or MK Abiola. There was no meeting where these things were decided, but he's been very clever at positioning himself in certain ways. So I'm not surprised that it's more of the same, and he's going to keep on doing this. It's a very faint dog whistle, but it's a dog whistle nonetheless, and the people to whom it's directed at understand what he's trying to say when he's saying it. It's also no coincidence that it's in the middle of a very contentious electoral tribunal process that he's invoking the memory of MK Abiola, because part of what his post-election political strategy has been to infer that if in any way the results or the supposed results of the February 25 election are contested or challenged or overturned in any way, that somehow that would represent a reprisal of the annulment of the June 12 election, that somehow that would be something unfair. So I'm not surprised that he's positioning himself in this way. But moving away from that, what I will say though is those who love to invoke the memory of the June 12 struggle, and who love to invoke the memory of the fight against Sani Abacha in the 1990s and the NADECO struggle, I think those people, the people who were actually involved in the struggle, haven't done a good enough job of coming out to state facts, and a lot of them have remained in the background and have allowed people who were nominally involved in the struggle, but at the same time, some of them were working at cross purposes with it. Some of them were doing it for all sorts of personal reasons. They've allowed those people to come out and sort of take credit and build political platforms out of those things, even if their claims are not necessarily true. So Tinubu, for example, who now has assumed this de facto title of the champion of Nadeco, which he wasn't, and a titan of the June 12 struggle, which also he wasn't. It's very unfortunate that the people who were actually around, who were actually in those rooms at that time, for whatever reason, have chosen to remain silent. I've spoken to a number of them, and they freely admit to me off the record that things took place in a very different manner to how they are portrayed publicly. But for reasons best known to them, they will never come out and openly state these things, which is why history gets to be written by people like Tinubu in Nigeria. History gets to be distorted, but based on at least publicly accessible historical accounts, which can be verified, which I can back up, it's fair to say that President Bola Tinubu coming out this morning and speaking about democracy as though he himself was instrumental in the struggle for the return of democracy. Meanwhile, this was someone who was negotiating with Abacha through the back door during the so-called Nadeco struggle, which was supposedly part of. This was someone that when Ken Saro-Wiwa was being executed by the Abacha regime in cahoots with Shell Oil, he owned a Shell Oil filling station in Washington, D.C. And in fact, Nigerians in Washington, D.C. actually held a demonstration at his Shell Oil, holding placards denouncing him in 1996. All of these things have fallen into a memory hole now. So he's able to present himself as a hero that he categorically was not. So it's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's as far as Nigerian politics go, it's more of the same until those who know better or those who were there come out and state what happened and allow history to be written correctly. We're going to be seeing more of
But
this.
is there a particular reason why those who were directly involved in the Nadeco struggle now are just being quiet about the whole thing? Because if they are quiet, of course, it gives room for people like Bola Ahmed Tinubu to come out and flaunt themselves as the champions of democracy and the fights they had in 1993.
So the problem that a lot of those people have is that they were not politicians. So if you recall, the organization which became known as Nadeco was a coalition. It didn't expressly start off as it was a political movement, obviously, because they had a political goal, but it didn't necessarily start off as a partisan political movement. So it was a coalition of people from all walks of life. So there were doctors, there were lawyers, there were journalists, there were politicians, there were business people, entrepreneurs, there were all sorts of people who just found themselves, together trying to push this particular agenda, most of whom were even outside the country. So a lot of these people are not used to being in the public glare. They're not used to being in the limelight, and they don't like being spotlighted. So if one of them were to come out and were to state categorically that this person, Nigeria's current president, who has told this fantastic story of how he opposed Abacha, was actually Abacha's mole in the Nadeco movement, and we always make sure to keep important information away from him because we didn't trust him, which actually happened. If those people were to come out to say that, well, the Tinubu media machine will come after them, and they are not used to dealing with that kind of attention. They are not used to dealing with that kind of spotlight. So they would rather speak to people like me, and they hope that somehow I can tell their story on their behalf, which isn't always possible. Right, because telling a second-hand story isn't nearly as good as hearing the story from the horse's mouth. So for a lot of them, it's just the fact that they are not people who are capable of dealing with certain kinds of attention. So they'd rather just sit down and watch it happen, and then complain bitterly to a few people around them. But ultimately, that does absolutely nothing.
Okay, so there's also a tendency for us to think that you have a certain kind of leaning because of, the information you have garnered in the last couple of months, especially with regards to the just concluded cycle of election. Why am I saying this? Because we know that Bola Ahmed Tinubu, now the president of the Federal Republic, was actively involved in the June 12, election cycle, especially under Nadeko. Now, when you say that he's, casting himself in a certain light, will you say that that is from, a neutral standpoint, not just because he is the president that Nigerians did not want to have?
Well, it absolutely is it's a historical fact that I'm stating. So it's not an opinion. It's a historical fact that his supposed involvement in June 12 had several asterisks all over it. He wasn't trusted within the Nadeko movement. That's also a historical fact. If you speak to people who were actually part of Nadeko, they will tell you this freely. He was well known. It was a well-known fact that, well, by day he was with Adeko, by night he was with Abacha as well. And I believe that I think it was Kola Abiola a few years ago stated that while his father, that's MK Abiola, was he had his mandate stolen after the June 12 election was annulled. Tinubu was actually trying to negotiate with Abacha that he should be appointed as a military, like a de facto governor of Lagos and administrator of Lagos. And when he didn't get that, then he went into exile and then started making a lot of noises, but at the same time was still, hobnobbing Abacha through the back door, and interest related to Abacha. And it's also a historical fact that one of probably the largest, the most important money launderer that Abacha worked with to launder his estimated $4 billion worth of loot, a Lebanese businessman called Gilbert Chaguri. As soon as Abacha died, and Chaguri was, he left Nigeria briefly. When he came back in the late 90s to early 2000s, looking for a way to integrate himself back into Nigeria, the person he ended up falling in with was the then governor of Lagos State, Bola Tinubu. That's also a historical fact. They still remain very close friends and business associates till today. That's a historical fact. So anyone who has an interest in telling an accurate version of history should be interested in this thing. So it's not a case of
So speaking of accurate versions, there's something you just pointed out about Bola Ahmed Tinubu standing side by side with negotiating with Abacha, right? But this particular information was not on mainstream media, with just speculations back and forth. People do not have that information. Is there any way that you can back up that particular claim?
Well, the person who made that claim was Kola Abiola himself, MK Abiola's son, and this was reported in mainstream media when he made those comments. So, again, this isn't me coming up with anything. This is me just quoting.
So that's like a third party reportage of what happened.
Exactly. Well, I mean, Kola Abiola is somebody who, if anyone would know, he would know because he was there. This was his father that was involved in this thing. So if he's saying it, especially as given the fact that when he was saying it, he wasn't a political adversary of Tinubu when he was saying it. But so for him to say it, I don't think he had any incentive to be lying about it. So, but again, this is something you can Google. He made those comments himself, and he has never retracted those comments.
Okay, so still speaking about revelations and telling history right, this morning on the front page of the Vanguard, we are having statements like shocking revelations about, the June 12 annulment. It's now looking like some more people are offering more information and insight as to what really happened. A particular speech by, I think is Ghana now, let me get that right.
Jerry Ghana.
Yeah, by Jerry Ghana this morning. He's saying that, let me look for that particular one just a minute. But then they're saying our efforts to give Nigeria's best election, speeches by Professor Humphrey Nwosu. There's this particular one that I needed, but just to piggyback on it, more like people are offering to speak, and he said that the annulment of the election was not necessarily in the favor of Nigerians. It's on the front page of the Vanguard this morning. What are your thoughts? So far so good in the journey from the June 12 experience to where we are. Do you think that we have progressed in our democracy with or without the back end story of what really happened?
If you had asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have said yes, we definitely have made progress as far as our democratic journey goes. But having witnessed what we witnessed, a couple of months ago, and the 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 realization that we're essentially back to a situation where the exact situation we're trying to avoid in 1998, where, if you recall, at the moment when Abacha happened to die, he was actually in the middle of executing a transition program for himself. He basically wanted to hand over power to himself after having transitioned to a civilian head of state. So he wanted to officially retire from the military, or resign from the military, and um, basically become a civilian, quote unquote, and then hand over power to himself after holding a sham election where he was going to be the sole candidate adopted by all the parties. So there was this thing called Youths Earnestly Ask for Abacha. If you remember, a fellow called Daniel Kanu and his 1 million man marches nationwide. That was a thing. And then, fortunately, he died, so we didn't get to have. And then he initially planned, he actually had plans not only to hand over power to himself, but eventually to hand over power to his son, Mohamed Abacha. So, having transitioned to an electoral democratic system, there was definitely some progress that was made. But as of 2023, we're essentially now back to a situation where, once again, where we had something that was supposed to be an election, but it seemed as if the powers that be had predetermined the results. Even when the result that was announced didn't have any meaningful correlation with what we witnessed, both in person and colloquially. There was no correlation between the two, and the promises and guarantees that were given regarding things like electronic transmission of results, these things were just blatantly thrown aside at the last minute, and all we had was go to court. And I'm not saying this as a supporter of the opposition, which I am, but I'm saying this in a more general sense. I definitely get the impression now that, definitely, as far as first of all, as far as the electoral part of the democracy goes, we're back to the bad old days. We're back to the Morrissey rule.
Again, David, don't you think that because the matter has, or rather is in court, we should just keep cross fingers until the court decides who the actual winner of the February 25 election actually is? And I know that Nigerians are also hoping that the judges will do the right job at the end of the day. So let's just move on from there now. And I know that journalists or journalism or the media as the fourth estate of the realm. Let's look at the role of journalists in entrenching democracy. Now, there's been a lot of arguments, especially with the kind of job that you do, the undercover, which is investigative journalism. A lot of Nigerians say that you cannot be an investigative journalist in this particular country because they will come for your neck. But again, let's look at how we have come so far when we're talking about democracy. How has journalism come so far? How has the different administrations, been able to give us that enabling environment to practice what we are practicing?
Well, yes, to an extent, it's practically impossible to do the job that I do in person in Nigeria, because you are liable to to lose your head. It is what it is. It's not ideal, but that's the reality of the situation. However, I think the emergence of the internet as the primary medium with which information is dispersed and exchanged in Nigeria has changed a lot of things. We're having this conversation this morning because of the internet, right? I'm 6,000 miles away, but we're having a conversation in real time, and it's being broadcast live to I don't know how many thousands or millions of people are watching this. This is
millions of people actually.
Yeah. So this is only possible because of the internet. Maybe 20 years ago in Nigeria, this wouldn't have been possible. So in that sense, the internet has changed a lot of things. The major thing that I think people like me are benefiting from, that journalists like me are benefiting from and are taking advantage of, is the fact that we no longer have to go through certain gatekeepers to get information out there. So previously, to do this kind of work, you needed to have maybe some kind of rich patron behind you, You needed to have an editor who would support you, who would back you. Then you needed to work for a platform with a significant amount of resources. So the likes of Dele Giwa, for example, the kind of work they did was only possible because I mean you had a platform like Newswatch behind you. Newswatch had what formidable financial backing. Again, all of this has slipped into the Nigerian memory hole. But Newswatch was a formidable organization. They had huge financial backing. They had a team of lawyers, they had security, they had all sorts of things. Delegate was able to, travel to London and back freely, just as part of the process of carrying out investigations. Um, but nowadays, you no longer need those structures and those things around you to be able to do this job. So in my case, for example, I basically run it's basically a one-man operation with like 2 or 3 people who work on like an ad hoc part-time basis. So there's like a part-time editor who I work with every time I have a story to put out. Then I have a graphics person, I have an audiovisual person, and that's pretty much it. But this platform, when anytime a story is published, it goes out to the direct mailing list, at least 46,000 people. And then when you add the distribution from like my social media, almost 1 million people, which previously wasn't possible. So what that has done to journalism in Nigeria, that it has made it possible to bypass those gates that the establishments used to have in place that kept Nigerians away from
commendable. Highly commendable. We must say we appreciate you for the quality of work and the new phase that you're giving to investigative journalism, especially in the country, even on your platform. But then again, something is worrisome. Like you said, it becomes next to impossible to practice investigative journalism. But another aspect we see is that it's also kind of difficult for mainstream media to hop on your works, like adopt it into the mainstream media and maybe elaborate into these issues. Why do you think that there is that barricade or dividing line? Yeah, it seems like there is a disconnect between what David Hundeyin is doing as an investigative journalist and what the rest of the mainstream media is doing.
Well, the reason for that is very simple. The reason is that if you examine what the financial incentive is behind both operations, you see that it's a very different incentive in each case, which is why they both go in different directions. So in my case, my work is reader funded. My platform, West Africa Weekly, is a subscription funded platform. So if you like what I do, you purchase a subscription. So the reader directly funds what I do, which means that the only loyalty that I have in my work is to the reader. The only loyalty I have is to the story. So I know that what is expected of me is to put out the best story possible with all of the evidences and proofs that anyone can ask for, and to present a full picture of what happened. That's what's expected of me. So I can deliver that because the readers themselves are the ones funding it. But the mainstream media, their funding arrangement is a bit different. So first of all, which is why I don't like criticizing a lot of my colleagues directly, because it is what it is. So I used to work in mainstream media as well. How it works, for example, is the largest single advertising spender in Nigeria, as far as media is concerned, is the Nigerian government. The Nigerian government is the largest media spender in Nigeria, followed by some of these large private media, business conglomerates, many of which don't even pay you to advertise directly, but they rather pay you to keep their names out of the press, out of the media. So as a practitioner in that space, you are very constrained. There's very little you can do. So if you're trying to do this kind of work on a mainstream platform, chances are your editor is going to pull you aside and say, we can't publish this. And it's not because the story is bad, it's not because the story is not true, but it's because if you publish it, there's a few million naira worth of revenue which has been booked, which is supposed to come in this month, which might not come in because you offend the particular client or whoever that this story mentions. You can't do it. So what the mainstream media in Nigeria ends up doing a lot of the time is they cover the same stories I cover, but from a different angle. And they just kind of leave it to the audience that, okay, if you are really interested in knowing the truth about this, we've dropped a little hint for you in here. So You then go and do your own research.
Do
Something
you
to show.
think
It might
do you
surprise you
think
to
that
know that.
NBC laws are part of what is mitigating how widely these stories can be,
Accepted?
yeah,
Yes.
accepted or covered in the mainstream media?
Yes, absolutely. The so-called NBC Sixth Schedule
NBC
Amendment, which was released, I think, in 2020, I actually wrote a very detailed review of that regulation.
NBC regulations.
What
Yeah.
it did was it essentially made it illegal through the back door, because technically it's not a law, it's a regulation, but it's applied like a law. So that's a semantic. But it basically made it illegal to, as a broadcast organization, to broadcast anything that the Nigerian government doesn't like, pretty much. It basically made it illegal. So one of the clauses in that regulation was any material which can cause embarrassment to the government of Nigeria shouldn't be broadcast, essentially, which is a very sort of broad and open-ended clause that can be used to mean anything. This conversation technically can even be included in that, depending on who chooses to enforce it. So that's the problem. So that's the problem a lot of media organizations have been facing, that it's not just the fact that the laws are draconian, they are, but it's also the fact that the way they are worded is so ambiguous, it's so open-ended, that depending on what side of the bed the regulator wakes up on, they can choose to use it to go after you. So you are constantly walking on eggshells, you are constantly treading a very fine line, trying not to offend the Ministry of Information, trying not to offend the NBC, trying not to offend somebody who has the phone number of the DJ of the NBC or the Minister of Information, so that you don't end up paying 5 million naira fine every day.
But that's obviously something you have the purview to do. You offend anybody and you just go ahead. Like you said, your obeisance is to your readers and some of your personal patrons, so to speak. So well done for having an edge over mainstream.
But again,
I mean, it might even surprise you to know. It might surprise you to know that in a number of cases, some of the information that I publish actually comes from my colleagues in the mainstream media who are free to publish it. So, you have to give them credit as well. They are doing the best that they have, given the situation that they have at hand.
Okay, so let's still talk about investigative journalists now. I know that you're more like endangered species, but apart from, in Nigeria, of course, apart from yourself and Fisayo Soyombo, how many more investigative journalists do we have are still actively involved in this kinds of job? But again, I wanted to ask a question linking to what Uyai was trying to ask in terms of mainstream media and social media, where you get to publish a whole lot of your jobs. Now, there's also the angle of social media having a lot of fake news, so we don't even know how to begin to analyze which one is fake and which one is real. A lot of people just think that when one is on mainstream media, it is the truth and nothing but the truth. But there's that disparity between what is true on social media and what is not true. So you can just voice both the two questions and then answer it. Thank you.
Sorry, you glitched for like 5 minutes, for like 10 seconds there. I lost you briefly, so if you can just quickly restate.
Okay, so I was trying to say that investigative journalists are more like endangered species in Nigeria. Now, aside from yourself and Fisayo Soyombo, who do we have again in this country practicing investigative journalism actively? That's the first question, if you get that correctly. Yes. And then the next question is us being able to decipher what's true and what's fake on social media, what is a fact and what is not a fact on social media as compared to the mainstream media.
Right. So regarding the first question, there are a lot of Nigerian investigative journalists. I think why the misconception exists that it's just Fisaya and myself is because of the types of stories that Fisaya and myself take on. We take on these very difficult, these sort of visually spectacular stories, but there are a lot of journalists who do investigative journalism in Nigeria. It's just that maybe the stories that they take on are not, they don't get as
You're,
much
you're not
recognition,
mentioning
or
names.
the platforms they work through.
Is that is that deliberate?
No.
Let's celebrate them.
I'll mention names. So you have people like Chinedu Asadu, for example. He used to work for the cable. He now works for AP. You have people like oh my god, I can't. So if you watch that BBC documentary about
What about the
bandits
person
in
that works for
university,
Transparency International?
you know, they're researchers who work with Amnesty International, Transparency International. Technically, what they do is a form of investigative journalism as well. There are all sorts of investigative journalists in Nigeria, so it's very uncharitable and unfair to them to say that, oh, there's just a few of us. No, there are many of us. It's just that we do different types of stories. And then the second question was, how do we parse truth and fiction on mainstream media and on social media? Well,
definitely,
the process is the same. The process nowadays is the same for both mainstream and social media, and it starts with the basic ingredient is skepticism. So anytime a claim is made, whether it's on a big traditional trusted platform or it's just something you saw floating around on Facebook or Twitter, the default reaction nowadays has to be skepticism. The default, that it's unfortunate, but that's just it. You have to assume that anything you see is not true. And then you sort of, it's sort of like guilty until proven innocent. That's a very nasty way of putting it, but that's how information has to be treated today. So you first have to reflexively disbelieve it and then look for ways to confirm it. You know, research. So in the mainstream media says one of the easiest ways to do that is to cross-reference. Right? It's not perfect, but it's generally quite accurate that if there is a big claim or story that has been put out, and you only see it in one place, and a couple of hours later it's not covered anywhere else, there's no reference to it anywhere else, it's just like a tweet you saw, and there's no reference for it, and it's just in that one place, there's a very high probability that it's going to be false. Because the bigger the story is, the more likely it is that more big platforms will pick it up. And then, like in my case, what I try to do to make it easier for my audiences to determine that my story is true is that I don't just report it. I don't tell you I saw a document stating that XYZ. Instead, I'll put the document in the story. So I don't need you to trust me. I don't need you to trust David Hundeyi's word, okay? Because David Hundeyi is a human being; he could be lying, right? So instead, look at the documents, look at the evidence, look at the receipts. That's what I personally try to do with my stories, so that you know, any personal bias or leaning or whatever doesn't necessarily affect the quality of the story, because people can see that, you know, for themselves. So it's a similar thing when reading information. I always try to, if I see a story that is reported somewhere, I always try to see if it's possible to sort of reverse engineer the story and sort of check out the background. Is this true? Can I get any documents for this? Can I prove that this is true? Now, that's generally how I tend to work things out. But even then, it's not a perfect process, because even occasionally, even I do sometimes.
On the heel of all of this, which is most important, we've been driving to regulate social media for some time now. It was even driven to the National Assembly. What's your personal opinion about regulating social media?
I don't believe that a Nigerian government should be the one to regulate social media, right? If it were I don't know how this is going to come across, but I'm just going to say it anyway. If it were a government that had a track record of respecting people's rights of expression and people's fundamental human rights, if it was that kind of government in a country that has that sort of record, let me just pull a random example out of the air. Let me say Norway or Canada. If it was that kind of government that said they want to quote unquote regulate social media, I would still have questions, but I would feel a lot less reflexively opposed to it than I do when it's a Nigerian government that says they want to regulate social media. Why would the Nigerian government want to regulate social media?
To check fake news, of course.
Well, I mean, that's what they would say, but what record do they have? First of all, who is in terms of disseminating fake news. Who is the largest offender in Nigeria? It's the
But,
government
but you know
itself.
the problem that we have is that we have a lot of exaggerated content, even when it's like the truth, but then we exaggerate, because sometimes I and Janice, we have those conversations.
Yeah.
You're looking at headlines and this headline has nothing to do with the content.
And some are
But
totally
here's the
false.
thing. Here's the thing.
And
Yes,
I'm happy that you said that you've also fallen victim to fake news as well. So there should be some kind of regulations. And again, what doesn't just sit well is the fact that a lot of young people just use social media to lash out, especially at leaders, right? The way some Nigerians get to insult presidents and governors on social media during political seasons as well. I know that the government also uses it as a form of propaganda. In 2015, that's one tool that the Buhari-led administration used in coming on board. But then again, David, don't you think that there should be some sort of regulations?
First of all, regarding how social media is used supposedly to insult political figures or public officials, that's not unique to Nigeria. In fact, compared to how engagement happens in places like the US or the UK, Nigeria is very tame. Believe me on that. The way you might think of it as insulting is actually very tame compared to how it happens elsewhere, because the internet is still a relatively
But does it make that
space.
does it make that the good thing to happen?
It's neither good nor bad. It's just how it is. That's how democracy works.
Okay.
The government is accountable to the people. The people don't have to be good. People don't have to be polite. They don't owe politeness to the political leaders. It's not your father. It's an elected official. That the official just has to deal with it. That's his job. And then secondly, when we're talking about big, exaggerated, fantastic claims that deceive people, well, I seem to recall a few weeks ago, somebody flying in a plane painted in Nigeria air colors and then posted on his Twitter handle that, congratulations, has been, culmination of a long process and blah, blah, blah. It gave people the impression that he has delivered something. And the whole thing was this huge deep fake. It didn't happen. The airline doesn't exist. The plane doesn't belong to the airline. All of it was just and then he came on TV yesterday and said it was a marketing strategy.
But we follow you on Twitter, David. You also took this particular Nigeria. You took it very personally. The whole Nigeria.
Oh yeah, because.
Okay,
because
go ahead.
And that's what I mean when I say that government is by far the biggest of the Nigerian government is by far the biggest offender when it comes to spreading fake news. Because not only does it
in your opinion, I must say,
claims
in your opinion,
not only does it, but it has a reach that nobody else has. So the Nigerian government has, in terms of, first of all, in terms of media platforms that it owns, it has NTA, Radio Nigeria, Voice of Nigeria, and then all the several NTAs because NTA is a network, I think about 27 TV stations. It has print publications. It has access to the full Nigerian media. It's a media behemoth, and it puts out messages that it knows are not true. So in terms of spreading fake news, who is the biggest offender in Nigeria? Is it people who post fake news on Twitter? Or is it the Nigerian government, which actually has the power to even ban Twitter and still puts out fake narratives? So these are the issues, which is why, this issue of the Nigerian government regulating social media, I would never be on board with that. If any government is going to regulate social media, I would never trust the Nigerian government to do it.
Okay. All right, so we have just a question on the side by someone who's following the conversation and would like to find out if you are a brother to the spokesperson for the Lagos State Police Force, Benjamin Hundeyin. So I think there's more people that would like to find out, are these Hundeyin brothers doing this on different sides of the law?
So there's only one Hundeyin family. So, and anyone with that surname is definitely related. We all come from the same place. It's a place called Sowe in Badagry. So there's only one Hundeyin family. We're cousins.
Oh wow.
Yes, we're on different sides of the fence, but yes, we're cousins. So anyone with that surname is my relative. Yeah,
thanks for the clarification. But let's put this to rest at this moment. Our time is almost up. Would like to know, what is the fate of investigative journalism or journalists going forward, especially in this particular administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and what do you foresee in this 8 years of administration, owing to the fact also that the president has been very, very careful in terms of soothing the feelings of Nigerians?
Well, what I suspect will happen over the coming 8 years, if it drown out independent voices with propaganda, because that's what he did in Lagos. So that's the only precedent that there is to work with. So I'm going to have to assume that the same thing is going to be scaled up to the federal level. And then the other thing that's going to happen, I suspect, is that there's going to be some sort of digital crackdown on voices like myself. It's happened before under the Buhari administration, providing access to the People's Gazette website. So there was a time in Nigeria where you had to use a VPN to get access to gazetteNGR.com. I suspect there will be more of that under the Tinubu administration, because the people Tinubu has with him are a lot more tech savvy than the people Buhari had with him. So I suspect there will be more of that. There might be more of an attempt to go after social media. I hope it doesn't happen, but I suspect there will be more of an attempt. So, I mean, I don't want to be the guy who goes around shouting that the sky is falling down. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but that's my reading of the situation.
Well, you already are.
I don't think Tinubu sees a free press as his friend. I think he sees a free press as something to either be co-opted or to be conquered. But again, Nigeria should feel free to prove me wrong.
Of course, and that's also in your greatest opinion, depending on how he decides to use the media. But we must say a really big thank you to you, David Hundeyin, for coming on Rise and Shine this morning. It's been a great time of conversation, sharing your wealth of knowledge. I mean, traveling a lone path in terms of investigative journalism, bringing insight to some of the things that you do. All of us at Spectrum TV and all our viewers from across West Africa appreciate you this morning. Of course, we definitely look forward to having more and more interviews with you as we progress in this particular administration and on other topical issues also.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, thank you. That was a great one there, definitely, Uyai, this morning. Of course, let's remember it's June 12th, and we're celebrating Democracy Day and all that democracy stands for as a nation. I'm happy that it's more like a collective talk from different people. Let's see how we can, as a people, encourage democracy. We know that there are just a little bit of hitches here and there in terms of good leadership and all of that, but we are happy that we are here today. 23 years of unbroken democracy is something to celebrate for.
Something to celebrate for. Like we said, it is time to hope against hope in Nigeria. There is light at the end of the tunnel. But it's been a great Monday morning, even as you're relaxing, and we are here to serve you. But a big thank you to you who choose the Spectrum Television and Rise and Shine. We are here because you are. My name is Uyai Anieka, and let's do this again tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. My name is Janice Cobham, and we'll definitely see you again tomorrow. Thank you and bye-bye. We hand you over now to Sports Central with Isaac and Blyden Okam.